the EQI 2.0 is based around the individual. I took my assessment, and girl, I was like on the low side of what my perception was of myself.
Okay.
Which, like, you know me, is that would be a little bit, I thought it was a little surprising because I mean, I don't think I'm all that, but I didn't I didn't think I would be so low on some things. But you know, he
Okay.
said that it could be just the way that I was perceiving the questions, the way that I was, you know, thinking about them. So you have to
Yeah.
give a 10 point one way or the other. But anyway, it's really interesting. And to be able to use that just to help people kind of understand where they're at and why they react to certain situations, it's powerful.
Yeah. That was when I first was in my like well-being struggles and I was trying to get out of it. That was a lot of where I started to root, was the psychology of it. And then doing tests like that just to understand why I function the way I function.
Absolutely.
And then of course, like why other people. And so that's something that is really fascinating to me. And it's almost like you want to have everyone in your life take these personality tests so that you can have a really objective understanding of why it is they respond this way, why it is that you respond this way.
So we can all quit feeling like so lost about, you know, and just settle into the fact that it's okay that this goes along with your personality. Obviously there's some things
that you can alter,
but it gives you a base point of some place to start to say, okay, like for me, not surprisingly, empathy was my one of my things. And I know that I struggle with empathy because I'm a fixer. I can listen, but I listen with a fixing ear, like, okay, I'm really sorry that you're feeling that way. Here's some things that we might be able to do to help you, instead of, you know, somebody who has empathy. They listen, they're just there to listen. And if somebody is asking for help, then they're there to help them, but that's not the way they listen to conversations. So it's just it's fascinating.
That's really interesting, because when Dr. Holly and I, so what we're talking about, Dr. Feldman, is Pam is attending an emotional intelligence certification course. And so she's, you know, getting certified in EQ, and she's learning a little about herself in the meantime. And when Dr. Holly and I did the life coaching certification, that was something that, you know, we were taught, and I was taught it in the yoga certification, is creating this space for people to, like, through the coaching process, begin with their emptying out. And then once they, you know, empty out, then you can move toward getting them from point A to point B to the fixing. But before, you know, before you get there, you've got to create this space for them to you just hold the space for them to process. And when I think about it in vet med, I think about when someone comes in and they've got, you know, the 18-year-old Yorkie who's in kidney failure, and you have to create this space for them to process through potentially this like end of life discussion, or, you know, maybe it's the day that they're coming in for their euthanasia, and you create this space for them to, you know, to just be there in it. Right. Q, like, can you, you know, like think about that? Like if, like, that's what we're doing in vet med. And then, just the conversation with everyone else. Right.
And I think Dr. Feldman's pretty good at that.
I bet he is.
For sure, man. Yeah, I remember when we had the conversation after my friend Jason's suicide. You know, I remember that conversation that I had with Dr. Feldman, and it was really just asking kind of like those open-ended questions. And I don't really remember a ton of him telling me how to feel or um, giving me things to do. It was really just him being there and asking sort of the right questions, if you will, to allow me that space, and that was really, it was really powerful and really important.
So this is really interesting, you guys, because I just watched a webinar recently, and personality type was coming up as being one of the key factors for poor well-being. And I think, so for me, when I was in college, I drilled down hard on personality type and learning anything I could about that self inventory, introspection, everything, so that I could help, myself get through it. And I was an INTJ back then. And so that was right, very analytical, scientific minded. And in real life, it was like wound tight type A. And of course, this is when I was really, really struggling with anxiety and things like that. And now, so 15, 20 years later, I took it recently, and I am an INFP. So I moved a little bit more toward the feeling space, which I felt like that was indication that all of the things that I have done over the years really did shift my personality. I did not go from like, Hellboy to Mary Poppins. It's not like I'm a totally different person, but there was a definite shift in my personality type. The people that know me now, would be like, oh my gosh, it's kind of like a different person. And the people that have known me over the years can see those gradual shifts. So
I think that Renee, that's probably because personalities don't typically change all that much.
Yeah, you can't.
It's the time that you have spent getting in touch with your own emotions and how you react to them. So your emotional intelligence, that can absolutely change dramatically if you take the time to understand it and just kind of know where you want to be. And at first you just have to be okay with where you're at today. And then you can start working on the areas that you feel like you need to work on. So I think that's why you've changed in your personality, that you've gone that much, is because you have spent hours upon hours really looking at your reactions to things and developing that mindset. Instead of, a lot of people, I think, do it the opposite. They try to change their personality instead of just saying, okay, I'm an introvert, and you can change your personality a little bit. But that's what they're saying, is that personalities don't really change all that much. It's your emotional intelligence, the way you handle yourself in situations, that changes.
Okay.
So I've got a question, and this one's kind of directed to Dr. Feldman. I've heard a lot about, I guess, is it proactive or just having a mental health professional, be it a therapist or whatever, before, even if you're just doing like
Well,
perfectly fine, right? That you don't have any concerns, you don't have a mental illness or mental health condition, and you're happy, you don't think you're depressed. What are your thoughts about that? Is having a mental health professional that you can talk to at whatever frequency, be it once a month, once a year, is that something that you typically would recommend or suggest or have people look into? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a mental health professional, so I look at this a little differently. I think obviously people's mental health is, a key essential component in their well-being. I think that whatever people can do proactively, to try to maintain their well-being, is great. But I operate in a different realm. I'm aware of emotional intelligence, it's a key component, but there are other factors that, when things kind of reach the point of impacting an individual's functioning, in pathological ways. I mean, that's what the therapy arena is typically about. And we mix things like life coaching and, other things, which are great, I think, tools, potentially good tools. But I don't want to mix, I don't want to mix all of these together, because that can potentially give wrong impressions to people. I think what Renee was talking about, her self-exploration journey, et cetera. My question would be, have you ever had professional help? So, that's what I just don't want to avoid that piece. I'm not saying everybody needs professional help. To your question, people typically don't operate that way. They're not going to hire a mental health, a mental health professional just to kind of, if they're doing well and they feel they're doing well, and it's not negatively impacting any spheres in their lives, their relationships, their work, their, overall functioning. So, I mean, it's an interesting thought. I like to think that
Well, it's almost like,
go ahead.
It's almost like preventatively, like, if I'm feeling healthy as a human, they still recommend that I go get a physical, once a year, just go see my GP. Do you see that as being a recommendation at some point in the future? Like, you should have a talk with a mental health professional, once a year.
Well, I think, I mean, I guess it certainly wouldn't hurt. But we talk about things like educating people about the benefits of, taking care of themselves physically, mentally, very important. So, whatever people can learn, ways to help themselves, great. I'm just trying to envision a scenario where somebody comes in to see me and say, hi, and I'll say, hi, what brings you here today?
Yeah.
What brings you here today? Well, I'm doing great, but I just wanted to talk to you.
Well, sometimes I want to call you just to talk to you, man.
And I would say, that's great. And then I'd say, okay, what would you like to work on?
Yeah.
So, we're kind of a solution focused perspective.
So to your
that's
point,
one approach.
Yeah, to your point, Dr. Feldman, I saw behavioral therapists for a number of years, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. I had a whole team of people. And I would actually, I've talked about this a couple of times, is I've had different people throughout the years, right? Because I was always looking for that best person for me, that best fit. And I found one whose name was Renee, and she was my favorite. And when I moved to North Carolina, obviously I could no longer be with Renee. And so when I moved, I was doing well, but I sought out a mental health professional as soon as I landed here, because I knew that moving was like a large stress factor in general. And I needed to have someone in my wheelhouse that if something came up for me, I had someone to go to. And then I did. I saw her for a while when I first moved here, and I did okay. And I think I just saw her a few times. And then I stopped seeing her when I felt like, okay, I was settled in North Carolina. And then I'm a huge mental health professional advocate. And so then I think when we were, having some other changes in the vet clinic and then in the relationship, we went back to therapy and stuff. So even a couple of years ago, I remember something was going on in the family, and I looked at Neil and was like, I need to talk to someone professionally. Like, I need a professional. Like, I can't do this alone.
Well, it's good that it's good that you recognize that, because unfortunately, too many people find themselves, in trouble for various, various shapes and forms, that can, and we hope, you obviously like to prevent things from getting to that point, preventatively, but the mental health arena, that's typically not the way
it works.
That's kind of along the conversation of, and Dr. Feldman, I absolutely believe in the when you're in like you go through stages of needing people to talk to. So somebody like me, who I absolutely have gone and went to therapy. I just went to therapy just not, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. And because sometimes you just need to sit in front of somebody and say, this is what's on my plate. This is what I'm dealing with. My
Sure.
friends can tell me one thing, but to sit in front of somebody like you who we just already know, all right, you're neutral. You don't have you know, you're just going to be honest, and you don't have a problem doing that. So somebody who is like just trying to get through their emotional side of things, and why am I reacting to this? At what point in people's conversations does society make it okay to seek out therapy? Because that tends to be when you say to people, you say, unless you're among people that are like-minded about therapy and just having this conversation, at what point, how do we get society and the people around us to not just instantly go, oh, therapy?
Well,
Why
I
would you
think,
need that?
obviously, the word stigma is very wide, widely used and known.
Yeah.
I know researchers who don't like using the term stigma, because just using the term stigma, implies that there's a stigma, so it can be very intertwined like that. Yes, society has a long way to go. We've been debating this for many, many, many
Yeah.
years. They even tried to, they passed like a mental health parity law, but it's far from any kind of parity with medical health. People are limited by the number of visits they could have typically by their insurance companies. So there's a lot of, regulation and control in this area, unfortunately, but I would love to see more acceptance. I think it's just so archaic, and certainly short-sighted that people don't, that stigma exists.
Yeah.
However,
Actually,
so, we try to do a lot of things to try to, break down those barriers. And, that's why we see a lot of celebrities out there and talking about, and athletes and so on, hey, it's okay to get help. I got help. I
Yeah.
needed help, so, yeah, I mean, that would be, if I could come up with the answer for that, no offense, I might be not talking to you folks. Well, I'd be talking to you from the island that I could afford to buy,
Right.
in a nice tropical climate.
To your point, Barry, I'm not sure about the mental health parity law. I'm just thinking about like people making fun of mental health. Is that what the law is, or what's the mental health parity law?
Now, the mental health parity law
Oh,
says
okay.
that, it equates, it's supposed to put, mental health, seeking mental health services and accessing mental health services on the same plane as, for physical conditions.
I see. I see.
Good.
I see what you're saying.
Parity, Parity, parity.
Oh, parody. I was thinking like Parody, like Saturday
So
Night
No,
was
no, no,
Live,
I.
no, 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 no,
something like
no,
that. Okay, okay, I've got
no,
you.
no.
And and
Equal
and the
playing field, yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you.
yeah.
Because it's very interesting. I was watching Shark Tank
I don't like this
episode.
angle here. Yeah.
I was watching a Shark Tank thing, and you've seen Shark Tank before, everybody, right? Where where people come on and they pitch their ideas, and it was a behind the scenes type thing, and some of the sharks, they were like, and w- with the people who were coming on there to pitch their ideas, they have to see a therapist, but they referred to the therapist as a shrink. They were like, they got to go see the shrink before
Yeah, I
they
mean,
actually get accepted into this thing, because getting a big deal from Mark Cuban or from something like that could be a big thing. They have to make sure that their mental health is good. But I was just like, what?
They
You
chose
know,
that word.
that's
They chose that word. Yep.
I mean,
and
that's a commonly used term, and a lot of people, yeah, I mean, it can potentially have some pejorative connotation, but it's sort of a slang term that again, some people can react negatively to. I don't take offense at it when people say, hey, I'm talking to my shrink.
Right.
So I think it's about perception, in that respect. I have a patient who, he nicknamed me Dr. Doom, because, he was a suicidal individual, and we did a lot of good work around his, suicidal ideation and so on and so forth. And, I mean, part of his kind of, he was a law enforcement officer, have a certain kind of humor. And, that was part of him. Hey, Dr. Doom, how's it going? you know,
Right,
so
right. Yeah.
I think it's really it depends on the individuals, but yeah, that term shrink is out there. We know.
But I wouldn't refer to you as as a shrink though. I feel
I
like that
wouldn't take
there
offense
is
at it. I wouldn't take offense at it.
because you're really cool. But I feel like if somebody if I tell my mom I'm going to a shrink, you know what I'm saying, she'd be like, oh, what the hell is wrong with you? Like why?
Right.
Like
Perception.
what's happening? You know?
Well, yeah, you're not going to see us. You're not going to, again, to my point, I don't talk, I typically don't talk to people who are doing really well,
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
you know, initially, you
Mhm.
know, or yeah. So it's like people go to a veterinarian, yes, for some prevention, but they also go because they got a condition with their dog or
Mhm.
cat or, you know, animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
On a good point, I did just see this the other day, you guys. I'm sharing this slide with you. It's a screenshot I took from a webinar. This was a recent study done by Merck. And so what they're seeing is that there is significant improvement in perceived attitude towards those either with mental illness or seeking help, right? So from 2017, we had 24%, and now in 2019 we had an increase of veterinarians who are caring towards those with mental illness. So maybe it's like a practice manager who has someone on their staff, or maybe it's a colleague who says someone on their staff. So perhaps it's indicating less of a stigma. So maybe we've got some hope and some trends that's moving in the positive direction, to your point, Pam. And
Yes.
and maybe that's
A
a
lot
good
of,
thing.
time, effort, and energy, you know, is being devoted to try to, you know, decrease, break down the barriers.
Mhm.
And there are you know, many different barriers. There's been research that looked at what are the barriers, you know, with adolescents, for example, for accessing mental health services. You know, why don't you go? What are the reasons? So, you know, it's almost so we it's good that we quantify or we can you know, empirically show. Anecdotally, we have a lot of information too, a lot of situations, and so yeah, there's a lot of pieces here, and frankly, I think I'll risk going out on a limb a little bit. Things change dramatically with managed care. You know, medical services, behavioral health services, not all, you know, to the negative, but you know, I don't want to take the time here to explain, you know, some of the things that I have to do, you know, record keeping wise, paperwork wise, you know, to justify, you know, getting reimbursed, you know, for my services. And so that's you know, the landscape is very, very challenging, and there's many pieces that contribute to, you know, that relate to these barriers, you know, for services.
That was one thing I was going to talk about is accessing the resources. So, you know, we know that there are some barriers, whether it be to mental health or to well-being, right? Because even in the well-being space, you know, we understand that people put that on the back burner. You know, we make calls daily to hospitals, and some people say, you know, if I had time for that, right? And what we're proposing is that we make time for that, because then everything else would maybe fall into place. But you know, there's definitely still barriers, and so we do hope, and I think that there are large strides, whether it be to mental health services or to well-being services, to make the content and the resources more accessible. 20 years ago, these conversations were not at the tips of our fingertips. You know, they were not within our reach. It was, I mean, I felt like I had to walk through the desert to get through some of these things that we're talking about now. But now we know that there are a lot more resources, and they're a lot easier to access. whether it's texting, a mental health provider, or, using the internet to access these things, being able to get to it on your phone. We know, 90% of people are doing everything mobily, not even on the computer, but just mobily on their phones. So, there's apps now, like, CBT, like apps, positive psychology apps, things like that. So I think we are seeing some changes, but this has been really good. And I think, to Quincy's point, like, I think if you were to approach your mental health as like a preventative measure, if you went in at any given time, if you're doing well, if I sat down with you and I said, hey, Doc, I had a baby last year, I went through COVID, I'm doing this company, here's my relationship, I just kind of went through my life. I would predict that
who's going to pay for the services?
I'll pay for this. I would pay you.
That's where we have this roadblock for people, is just that. Who's going to pay for the services? Because we typically have a hard time paying for the doctor visit that we mentally we're like, oh, I have to put out, $100 to go see my doctor because I've got a sinus infection, or, whatever it might be. Right. Imagine for people who they don't have something that they can pinpoint is wrong with them. And now we're saying, go talk to somebody for your emotional well-being. Most people don't want to put out the money to go for their health, let alone their emotional well-being. And I think that's where, Dr. Feldman, like, where do we have that how do we have that conversation with somebody? That's where, that conversation has to start, and is that it's okay. And it's just like going to the dentist. Most of us don't have dental insurance, right?
Sure.
Nobody else is going to, Aflac's not going to pay for my dental insurance, but I pay for it out of my pocket because my teeth are important to me.
Right, but you pay out of your pocket because you can afford to pay out of your pocket, perhaps. So, we have to be careful. There's not a one size fits all model here. You've got many, many, many factors that impact, help seeking. Mm-hmm. Financially is one. Cultural differences. All kinds of things can impact that equation.
Sure.
So, and some insurance policies have better mental health benefits than others.
Yeah.
We talk like wellness visits. Wellness visits are something that some of the, healthcare provider company, the managed care companies encourage people to do. For example, if you have a heart condition, you've been diagnosed with one, you've got some treatment, you're going to get bombarded with, material from your insurance provider, recommending, prevention, so on and so forth. Why? Because they want to keep the costs down on the back end, by taking better care of yourself, it can potentially, it can the thinking is it will decrease utilization, of more expensive treatments and so on and so forth. So the real reality, and I don't mean to, well, maybe, I don't, we're in a market economy. We live in that kind of a world. So many, many, many things are driven by the bottom line.
Yes.
Right.
So, in theory, I think the preventative approach would be great. I've talked about this for many years with law enforcement departments. When officers get in trouble and things happen, we go back to saying, well, part of keeping people employed and doing a good job and good careers, it would be great to have an annual visit, with the department mental health provider. for offices, so I mean, this thinking is out there in many respects. Same thing with the military.
Right.
Same thing, we could, I think, plug in any, helping profession, for example,
Right.
a first responder profession.
Yes.
And the benefits would clearly be there,
Mhm.
but it just hasn't moved to that point, certainly.
Yeah.
Far away from that.
So I just want to jump in for a second too, because on what Pam said and Dr. Feldman, I think you guys are both so right in that there are, a lot of factors that go into who can access the mental health services and things of that nature. But for a lot of people in the veterinary profession, I'll at least talk about veterinarians here because I know what type of salaries typically that we're bringing in. If we're talking about an average basis, and I believe that, Pam hit on something that's really important for those who can afford it, right? And so if you're a technician making $10 an hour, then, I mean, obviously paying, maybe $200 a month for a mental health professional, especially preventatively, just doesn't even make sense. But
Yeah.
a lot of veterinarians are probably making at least 60,000, and I believe I know there are student loans. At some point, we have to say you've got to prioritize yourself at some point, and and for me, I'm willing to sacrifice certain maybe luxuries that I have. I mean, I go out to eat. I mean, if you eat at Panera Bread, 2 or 3. I spent $30 at Panera Bread yesterday, right? I didn't have to do that, and if you do that 3, 4, 5 times a month, that's $150, $180 you're getting up to just in the fast food dollars alone. And I know that oftentimes um, we can just change that priority and say, you know what, I'm instead of buying this, I'm going to save up so I can afford this. And as adults and as professionals and as individuals, we have I want this to be empowering for a lot of individuals out there. If you really want those services, if it's something that you value, when there's a will, there's a way. And just know that. Just know that you can make that happen for yourself. And it's not going to be the AVMA's responsibility. It's not going to be the government's responsibility, your significant other's responsibility, your school's responsibility at the end
Mhm.
of the day. It would be so amazing and awesome if people provided these services for everyone. And I hope that someday that mental health services are, they're complimentary for all involved, and not just mental health services, but quality mental health
Yeah.
services. But that's a huge societal disparity. But until then, I want to teach people how to thrive in the system that we currently have, which doesn't provide, free or maybe not, I mean, cost-effective services for everyone, but to prioritize it for yourself and try to find a way to make that happen.
Mhm.
I'm always happy to have those types of conversations. Okay, this is what you want. You can't really get that right now. How can we figure that out for you? Those are the types of conversations that I love to have personally.
Yes. And that's kind of what, when I was saying, how do we start having this conversation? Um, I think that there's levels of, and like you're saying, Quincy, we only have to, once a year we have the wellness, and my doctor, when I go to my doctor, she's very good about, um, that's like the last thing. She checks my blood pressure, she checks airs, does the entire physical. And then when she's done with that physical, that's when she sits down and says, okay, tell me how you're feeling emotionally. How are things going? What's going on in your life? So that starts that conversation. And then at some point, if I really felt like I was, going over the edge, or she would make that recommendation to go see somebody like Dr. Feldman.
Yeah.
Not all doctors do that today, unless they go to their doctor and say, I don't want to live anymore. I'm thinking about hurting myself. Then it's instantly, okay, at this point I have to make a call, right? Because my job is to save you. And this is no longer necessarily a private conversation between the two of us. If my doctor really felt like I was suicidal, she would make that recommendation or make that call if she felt like I truly was going to hurt myself. But there, so what I'm trying to say is there's the beginning level of just having a communication with each other and getting people comfortable with talking about emotions and how do things just feel on a daily basis and we do that with our family somewhat and with our best friend. I look at my therapist as if I can't talk to my best friend about something, or I just feel stuck and that's not helping, my therapist then becomes my friend, the one that I can go to, who's going to tell me the truth, who's going to kind of help me get my feet back on the ground and get moving in the right direction again.
And we've got Tina that had joined us, you guys. So I did message her. Feel free to jump in if you have a question or wanted to share anything. But and with Pam, when you I think one thing we talked about just recently on a podcast with Dr. Matt Holland is finding the right people, right? You've probably been to a number of different, whether it's just MDs or mental health professionals over the years. Mm-hmm. So, how important it is to find the right person that you can feel connected to as a best friend, or someone that you can have an open dialogue with and feel trusted. Like Dr. Holly said, is that, Dr. Feldman's pretty cool. I like to talk to him. There doesn't have to be something wrong in order for me to want to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important too, is just finding people that we can relate to. Like I said, my favorite person was Renee, but I saw many different people throughout the years. And I think that's one thing, when I've talked to other people, it's like, oh, well, I've tried it once and, I didn't like it, and it's kind of, I equate it to allergies, the allergy case for animals is that you have the mom who's like, yeah, I tried everything. And you're like, what'd you try?
I just had a quick epiphany too. So when I needed to talk to Dr. Feldman, like when I literally needed to, I felt comfortable because I've been speaking to him for so long on a I need you basis. Mm-hmm. And so maybe going back to that whole preventive thing, just to have a mental health professional, like maybe if you have someone who you just kind of talk to when things are okay, that maybe normalizes reaching out when you are in need of a mental health professional. So, because I'm not sure I would have just Googled, and found somebody.
And there are some resources that I put in last week's discussion, and I'll put in this week's too, for the BetterHelp. BetterHelp, they offer services. But there are also local services that I remember I had a friend, she went through the county, that were lower cost services, that were still private services, but that, were just a different setup. I think, the scheduling and things like that weren't as frequent, but
paying Dr. Feldman, but I guess it's another point to make, I just
But you would have, though, wouldn't you have? Because you talked about that. You researched BetterHelp yourself, right? Like you would pay for it though, right? Like it's not something that you wouldn't invest in.
I was just throwing it out there that, I knew Dr. Feldman, but it wasn't from like a client, patient,
right.
You know what I'm saying, relationship or something like that. So
let me just say a couple of things here. The first of all, the landscape is, to getting help can be very challenging. Mm-hmm. And yes, on the surface, it might seem like there's more accessibility, mm-hmm. With using telehealth and so on. That's opened up some doors for people, easier access. But it's very, very challenging, unfortunately, to find it's got to be someone in your insurance network, and it's got to be someone that, has availability in their schedule, someone who, and then you kind of go through, okay, is there a fit?
Sure.
When you start talking. And so I wish it was as seamless, and in some situations it can be.
Mhm.
But in terms of, supply versus demand, we're woefully short, still, certainly with psychiatry. But hey, hopefully things are moving where we are realizing, when I read things in the popular press, calling attention to the fact that during the pandemic, we've got increased depression rates, we've got increased rates of anxiety, we've got increased domestic violence, we've got increased divorce rates, we've got increased, substance use. So we're aware, it's not like people are unaware, but getting these pieces to mesh together, a lot of time is spent doing that. And let me make one other quick comment before I forget. From the business side, I mentioned the market economy. So for employers who drive a lot of this, it'd be nice if employers would provide the wellness visits and so on. Businesses oftentimes view mental health stuff as soft costs. They're not tangible, so we have to spend time and energy, with business entities saying, well, let's look at it from a productivity perspective. If you're not, if your people in your workforce, if your veterinarians and your vet techs are struggling with mental health issues, it's going to affect their productivity. It's going to affect their attendance at work, and so on and so forth. So, that avenue is certainly often pursued and, clearly makes sense. But it becomes like a dollars and cents issue.
It does. It usually always, in most cases, I find when I'm talking to people, it does come down to, well, I just can't afford that. I just can't. Like when I was younger and, a single mom with 3 kids and going through the struggles and everything that goes along with that. If I had to choose between whether or not I was going to put milk and food on the table for my kids, or I was going to go see a therapist, that would have absolutely been good for me to do. And in the long run, maybe would have helped me not go down some roads that I went down. But at that point, I couldn't afford, it wasn't even in my head. I couldn't afford it. There was just, it wasn't a question. So there's a lot of steps in between these boundaries, these walls that we have to, as individuals, get through. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Feldman, because some of what I find in conversations that I'm having, whether it be with people in the military, or I have a son-in-law who's a firefighter, that help is available to them. For firefighters, they absolutely have, somebody that they can go and talk to, and it's free. It's paid for by the department. The department. They don't go talk to them though, because if I go talk to them, that means that I have a problem, and then that means that they're going to somehow label that I've got a problem, and it's going to go get back to my chief. And then all of a sudden, I'm not going to be able to be on that truck that's going to the fire because I'm not mentally stable. There's stuff going on for me.
Sure. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time over my career working with first responders and dealing, with those specific issues, and, clearly in the military as well. It affects, so, confidentiality is paramount, but there's limits to confidentiality, unfortunately, in some of these professions, and it affects physicians. It can affect veterinarians, about the perception of help seeking and the potential negative outcomes it might have for them. So, my philosophy has always been that it's got to, you got to have buy-in from the top down. And foster these environments that encourage help seeking.
Right.
We talk about it. We've been talking about it, a long time.
Mhm.
But until there's the perception, people realize, hey, good, I access these services, and people give testimonials about how it's been successful. But
Mhm.
overall, there is that perception that it's going to affect my job. They'll take my gun
Yes.
away. I won't
Yep.
be able to do my job. On and on and on and on.
Mhm.
So that represents and accessing services that a department might provide, EAP, employee assistance programs type services. There's a real reluctance, for people to use those services, again, because of what I was just saying. So I try to encourage people, okay, well, go outside your department if you're worried about that.
Mhm.
And so then a challenge can become finding people who are familiar with the cultures, the work cultures. That same thing with veterinarians, people who are familiar with the veterinarian culture, know what
Right.
it's like about the job, so they can be more helpful.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's certainly an example of the, I guess, stigma, for accessing services that prevents people from doing it.
So to that point, and I don't know that you'll be able to address this question, but if I boiled that down, the concern is, and I've been there, is if I access this service, then on the other side of that is a loss of control. Meaning I call the EAP or I call the mental health professional, I call the person. And when I do that, I lose control over what happens next. Because if I say something and I don't know what that something is, and maybe it's different for the veterinarian, the police officer, the firefighter, things like that, maybe it's different. But that at some point there would be a loss of control over the outcome of that session or of that treatment, right? And so,
Well, yeah, I think that one of the pieces for that is, it can be that when people are better off, being proactive, accessing those services rather than getting in trouble on their job,
okay,
and then, kind of being mandated
yeah,
to access the services.
okay,
That's certainly, the mandate is clearly where you lose control, but you won't necessarily lose control, by trying to access services.
okay,
Very simply, it's like, I try to tell people very simplest, in a simple way, you got to pay attention to the noise under the hood, using the car metaphor.
Yeah.
And if things aren't going well, if so, okay, then please, recognize that. And it relates to all the things we've been talking about before about the stigma. But I don't necessarily think it would be about loss of control. Maybe that's a perception some people may have, certainly. And that's unfortunate because it's just the opposite. It's to help them kind of try to regain some control in their lives where they may not be functioning well.
Mhm. Well, and just for me, for part of the reason that I feel like I'm even on this call is for me, I don't want to go in and have a conversation with a group of people. Doesn't matter what industry they're in. I don't want to go in and have a conversation with somebody like I am trying to be a therapist. I want to go in and start a conversation about individuals taking some responsibility for their own mental health, and then, if just being more mindful about their own mental health, their own reactions to things, at some point it becomes obvious that that's just not enough. And then that's when it's okay, I just need to go find somebody, a therapist, who can actually give them the tools and stuff that they need, which would be you. And so I think for me, having a conversation with you helps me to be able to, if I were to sit with a panel of people or just have a conversation over dinner with somebody, I don't want them to think that I'm trying to be a therapist, if that makes sense. It's having conversations with people like me and Renee that are just trying to have open dialogue with people and get people even thinking along these lines. And then at some point, not everybody can do this by themselves or for themselves. They really have to go and find a therapist that can help them. So that's where we've got all of these roadblocks that kind of happen when it comes to monetarily, how am I gonna fund this? But how do we help the people that even before they have to go and seek therapy, how as just individuals who care about people, how do we just open that dialogue with them? And I think, Renee, that's kind of what you and I have been talking about. It just getting people even comfortable, Dr. Feldman, with talking about it.
Sure.
Is
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of movement over the past several years. Mental health first aid, psychological first aid, which trains people, teaches people some basic questions, how are you doing, how are you feeling, to try to broaden kind of what you're talking about a little bit, being able to recognize when people might be struggling, but having conversations about, what's going on in their personal lives. Not everybody responds well to that. So, but it's interesting how trying to broaden out, as I say, the ability to identify people who may be struggling. Because it's typically those around them that see it rather than them themselves.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and Dr. Feldman actually, I mean, he talks about it in one of the courses, the suicide prevention basics course is, it's really asking that question, but in a non-rhetorical way, how are you doing? And then creating that space, like we talked about in the beginning, for an actual answer, not asking someone how they're doing while they're closing their car door.
I'm out.
Right.
I got an 11 o'clock patient.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this some more.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts about how this whole
Perfect.
thing today.